Hi everybody, welcome to our simple starting point with GeoInquiries. My name is Jessica Everett. I'm the STEM facilitator or teacher at Hardin Valley Elementary School here in Knox County. We are going to be talking about what a GeoInquiry is and how it can become your simple starting point for jumping off GIS in your classroom. So to start off, what is a GeoInquiry? I don't think I'd be able to pay attention to a session about a GeoInquiry if I don't even know what it is. So GeoInquiries are short, standards-based inquiry activities for teaching map-based content found in commonly used textbooks. And this is directly from Esri's website. Each activity is designed using a common inquiry model and can be presented quickly from a single computer and projector or modified for students' hands-on engagement. So we're going to talk more about that last part, how these GeoInquiries can be modified for student hands-on engagement. To cut this kind of down to a more understandable chunk, it's pretty much a lesson that goes through and provides questions for students where the answers can be found through this GIS platform, through looking at this map and the layers that are presented on the map. And it does link to many, many standards for us in both science and math. All right, so here's our agenda for this session. We're going to first talk about Esri's offering. So we're going to talk about who Esri is, and we're going to preview the available GeoInquiries that are located on their website while thinking about our standards. Then we're going to talk about selecting the one. How do we know the right one for our students? Because we know as educators there's so many resources out there that say that they're great for our kids. We put them in our kids' hands and we realize, oh, this doesn't hit the standard. Oh, this really isn't challenging for my kids. So how do we know which one is the right one to select for our kids? The next area we're going to approach is creating a student page. We're going to talk about preparing a GeoInquiry to place in students' hands. So how do we turn that GeoInquiry that's listed on Esri's website into a K-5 student-friendly handout? And really, honestly, for this session, I would not recommend putting these in students' hands unless they're third grade or above. You can do it with second grade, but it is very heavy support needed. So more than likely, if you're doing GeoInquiries with our younger friends, you're going to be doing that as the teacher, and they're going to be answering the questions aloud as you go through the layers with them. The last thing we're going to explore is we're actually going to tour a GeoInquiry. We're going to work through it together. We're going to experience a student-centered GeoInquiry for ourselves. So we'll kind of understand where the students are when they're going through this themselves. And we'll provide you with a GeoInquiry that is student-friendly for you to go ahead and take and go straight to your classroom with. All right, so to get to the GeoInquiries page on Esri's website, you simply need to click the link to the left of this video. If you're in a hurry, I would just go ahead and go into Google and actually type in GeoInquiries, and it's going to go take you straight to this website. GeoInquiries is trademarked by the company Esri. Esri is a leading GIS company. They have fantastic software that's utilized by professionals in so many different fields, and they make these GeoInquiries for teachers completely free to us to encourage us to utilize GIS so that our students are better prepared to engage in these fields that are utilizing their software later on. So these are the collections that they have. There are a lot of different collections. Now, I don't want you to be overwhelmed or overloaded. There is one that is specifically listed for upper elementary, and it's great. But I also don't want you to feel like I can't use any from this earth science set. You can still use it. You're just going to modify it because the way the GeoInquiry is written for middle and high school students, which is going to be over our students' heads. But that doesn't mean I can't use the map that's in this GeoInquiry with my kindergarten students or with my 5th grade students. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it has in the upper elementary collection. So if I go here, it's going to show all of these different GeoInquiries. So we can look and see we've got seismic events if we want to talk about earthquakes, energy production, public lands and national parks, climate, expansion of the United States, which is a huge one in 4th grade. We talk about exploring elevation with Lewis and Clark, street maps, time zones, ecosystems, biomes, settlement patterns, where does the water go, weather forecasting. So lots of different areas. This will be a great one with math when we talk about discovering map scale. But we're just going to go ahead and click into one to kind of just begin to understand how these work. So this is the actual GeoInquiry that they're going to provide you with. You can just download it and print it. But what I usually do is I take this and I modify it. So at the top, we can see that there are these Common Core standards and a geography standard here at the top. We're going to have to look at our standards, know what our standards are, and link them to those, because we don't use Common Core in Tennessee. We use our Tennessee state standards. So it does give us a little bit of an idea about the learning outcomes. That students will describe the path taken by the Lewis and Clark expedition. Students will identify the elevation changes along the route. So we can tell, is that a direction I want to go with my students? And if so, then this would be a good GeoInquiry possibly to take once we take a look at the map and see the skills that would be required for that. Inside of this GeoInquiry, we've got our E's, right? Our engage, explore, explain, elaborate. Again, I don't utilize all of the questions that are included in GeoInquiry because I need to keep it appropriate for the age group of students I'm working with and appropriate for their skills. So I could use these questions as base to jump from, or maybe some of these questions are fantastic the way they're written and you can use them right off the page. I just take the questions and I type them up in my own Word document for my students. So if we click this link up above, it's going to take us straight to the map that's going to have these different layers on it. And so the way a GeoInquiry works is that we're going to then use this map to answer the questions that are in the GeoInquiry. And so we're going to ask our students to more than likely go to content, and this is where their layers are. We call each piece of information that is mapped onto this map a layer. So if I don't want to see Lewis and Clark sites, I can click and turn off that content. If I don't want to see their journey, I can click and turn off their journey. If I don't want to see the Missouri River, I can click and turn off the Missouri River. I can turn off all the rivers. I can turn off the regions. So it depends on what you want your students to really be exposed to as to what you tell them to turn on and off. In the GeoInquiries, these layers are usually preset to be turned on or turned off. So when you're writing your own GeoInquiry, you're going to have to tell your students to either turn them off or turn them on, depending on what you want them to understand about this map and the information it provides. So if I'm talking to them about their journey, it might be less distracting if I only show the journey. And maybe I say, well, why do you think Lewis and Clark would go straight north instead of just going in a straight line? And that's when you can start to get into topography. We can see we've got some areas here that might not be as easy to negotiate. Same thing here. When we begin to turn on the Missouri River, they're going to see, okay, they pretty much stayed along the rivers and it helped them to have a source of water. It helped them travel. They're going to kind of gather information from looking at this map. And that's really what we want our students to do. They can go into the Lewis and Clark sites. If we click on the thumbtacks, it's going to give us a little bit of information about it so that we can kind of see what's going on with this. All right, so that is the basics of a GeoInquiry. They could also look into the elevations over here, which would help them understand what this area is showing. So you can talk to them about the legend. Like I said, the content is really where they're going to be clicking a lot. And that's going to help your students to begin to dive into these standards and into your standards with an approach that's more STEM-based by utilizing GIS to get that information. Our students, when they're exposed to the material this way, are way more engaged than if you're up there lecturing them. They need to be able to see and put their hands on data, and this is a great tool to utilize for that. So I highly encourage you to utilize GeoInquiries for your lessons. Let's go ahead and go back and look at a few more different GeoInquiries so we can talk a little bit about that. I'm going to go ahead and take us out of the elementary. Okay, so let's take a dive into the earth science collection. We don't have to stay anchored in elementary. We just need to be able to turn this content into what we want it to be. So if I look, these are all set for middle school and high school, but I can see a lot of great connections to my standards. Mountain building is a great one. A river runs through it, talking about larger watershed areas and how they meet the ocean. We can talk about weather. All these things are things we talk about with our students anyways. So it would be much more fun, I think, to teach them through a map utilizing GIS than it would be to lecture. So here's one, rocks tell stories. Rock types tell stories. So yes, the standard is meant for middle school. However, we have second graders who are supposed to look at the distribution and erosion of rocks and soil. We have fifth graders and fourth graders that look at fossils and how they're formed. So let's see if this is a GeoInquiry we can use. Now I can look here and see the learning outcomes. Students will differentiate rock types from their texture, color, and crystal size. Students will explain the location relationships between areas of igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic rocks using the rock cycle. So this sounds like a pretty good GeoInquiry for an elementary school student. But if I look down here in the way that they've done the E's, I can see that these questions are going to be more than likely over my kids' heads. And some of it's going to go beyond what the standard really calls for them to learn. I don't think any of our kids need to know about plutonic rocks at this point. But let's go ahead and look at the map and see if there's some usable information located in it that we could then turn this GeoInquiry into something we could utilize in our elementary school classroom. So if we look, we've got a legend and the map is still loading, so give it just a moment. It's a lot of information layered on here. And if we look, we can kind of see, there's a lot of different rocks out here, a lot of different rock types. I see a lot of red rock up here. So we can kind of tell this is metamorphic. Well, why would there be more metamorphic rock up here? What can we tell probably happened over here if we've got metamorphic? Well, we've got pressure, right? We've got some kind of heat. We might have some upthrusting out of the actual layers of the earth. We've got some igneous volcanic rock here and over here in the western United States. Just showing this information to your students would be amazing to them. Kids get so excited when they see something for the first time. And so getting them to see this data mapped through GIS is very empowering for them. We can see that the middle part, the Great Plains, happen to be sedimentary. Shocking, right? So when we talk about farming and agriculture, guess what? Sedimentary rock contains a lot of nutrients. It's generally a flatter area. We can tell all these kinds of things just based on these different types of rock. Now, if we go to our content, we can kind of see we can turn on and off these layers. So if I turn on the sedimentary rock, turn off the other rock layers, I can click on these thumbtacks and I can actually see the picture of these. What a great tour would this be for your second graders or your fourth graders to kind of talk about these different rock types. Maybe as the teacher, you show this to the kids. They don't necessarily do this on their own unless you want to write the GeoInquiry for this, but it's a great way for them to tour around and see these different ideas without being lectured to. So let's go ahead and jump back into our content. All right, so how do we select one? There's so many. We saw that there's just category after category after category. How do we select the one that's right for our students? And I thought this quote really hits on it. It's not about making the right choice. It's about making a choice and making it right. So even if that GIS or GeoInquiry is outlined for a high school class, how do I turn around and make it what I need to for my students? That's where we are experts. How do we take anything and turn it into something that can be utilized with our kids? And so that's where you're going to be able to turn around and not necessarily make the right choice, but make it right in the aftermath with how you approach it with your students. So, two big things you need to keep in mind when choosing and selecting a GeoInquiry from Esri's website. You need to keep in mind your standards. Here in Knox County, we don't go by the next generation science standards that are listed on the Esri GeoInquiries. We actually have our state standards. And so we have to kind of think about where do our standards come in that might be a little bit different than these next generation science standards. So standards are the starting point for all of our lessons. You know this. And GeoInquiries are no different. I don't need to choose one that looks cool if my goal is to help intertwine these different areas. Now, if you just want to teach GIS skills, by all means, choose one that's cool that you think your students will engage with. But I know for my sake, I generally am aware of what standard I'm teaching and how I can make sure that that's going towards growth for my students in each grade level. The next thing we can look at are the skill levels for our students. If the map is over the students' heads, they won't gather anything from the task other than frustration and confusion, and that's not what we want our students to feel about GIS. We want them to feel empowered to make better decisions utilizing GIS. And so if they're experiencing some frustration, that's normal, but if that's all at the end of the day they've experienced, then something went wrong. And going back to what you've heard in the STEM standards session, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to make mistakes. We just need to make sure that we're showing our students how we learn from them. So let's talk a little bit more about these GeoInquiries. How do we make them student friendly so that they are not overwhelming in terms of the skills needed? Screenshots are your best friend. I'm going to go ahead and include a link to the left of this video for you to be able to use if you don't know how to do screenshots. It'll explain to you how to do screenshots on both a Mac and a regular, like a Dell or a different type of computer. So use screenshots to capture areas, tools that you would like to call attention to. Students need to see that. The word doesn't really make a big difference to them, but if they can see exactly what you have on the paper and then compare it to what they're seeing on their screen, they're a lot more likely to be able to rise to the challenge of that GeoInquiry. So lots of screenshots if possible. A big thing that we run into is that we need to make sure that you've walked through the GeoInquiry yourself to make sure it's cohesive and that it flows. If you get in there and you're practicing your own GeoInquiry and realize, I don't know where I'm supposed to go for that button, then that means you're making that change before it hits your kids. And if it hits your kids, that's going to lead to that confusion and frustration that we don't want them to have. So make sure you walk through it yourself just like you would a lesson. And try to view it through your students' eyes, not necessarily through my teacher's eyes. I know I can do it. Can my third grader do this? What kids in my class are going to struggle with this? Do I need to make this a partner activity, which is fantastic, by the way, to do with these GIS GeoInquiries? The other way that we can make it student friendly is we need to stay focused. You do not have to use all of the features or questions that Esri provides you with in a GeoInquiry. And you're going to see that in the GeoInquiry we're going to do together today. Esri thinks big. Sometimes our kiddos don't need all of that. It's too much noise. They need to have that one flowing voice. And so for us to stay focused on our standard, to stay focused on, okay, do I actually need all of these layers or can I leave some of these layers off? We'll talk about that today. I generally do not use all of the questions because it goes in a lot of different directions and it's too much for my elementary school students. But you do you and you figure out what works best for you and your students in terms of GeoInquiries. So today's GeoInquiry that we're going to work through is one that I've picked a focus standard for. The standard that I've selected to cover in this GeoInquiry is for ESS 2.2, Earth Sciences. We're going to interpret maps to determine that the location of mountain ranges, deep ocean trenches, volcanoes, and earthquakes occur in patterns. Now that's a lot. That's a big standard in science to kind of undertake in one class. But this GeoInquiry lets me hit on mountain ranges and volcanoes. If I wanted to, I could incorporate the deep ocean trenches and the earthquakes, but to me that's overwhelming for one session in 4th grade. So today's GeoInquiry that I've created does not focus on all 4, it focuses on the 2. So the student handout that we're going to be working through today for this GeoInquiry can be found in the links to the left. It is a Google Doc. If you want to make a copy of it, you can do that and edit it within your Google platform. But it has lots of screenshots like we've talked about. I've incorporated a lot of questions that have some academic vocabulary in there. But like we've also said, this is a great practice to do in partners to work on those collaboration skills and just give each other support. Sometimes it makes you feel a little bit better if you can actually work with a partner through something that's challenging. And another thing before we get started to keep in mind, I know everybody's students have different accessibility to technology. One would assume that in my area, kids would be wonderful with technology and they simply struggle still. So when we start exploring GeoInquiry, there's a map that they need to get to. If you're doing this online, I would just put the link into a text so that they can get to it quickly. But since this is a handout, all I did was go into bit.ly and shorten the URL. They're not going to know how to put that address in more than likely, so you're going to have to show them how to put in an address if they're not aware of how to do that yet. That might be a hardship that you hadn't considered that they're going to need to surmount. So just keep that in mind when you do your first GeoInquiry. I might need to deal with this problem beforehand so that it doesn't disrupt your lesson. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump on into this GeoInquiry and tour through it. I did choose that Earth Science standard for this GeoInquiry, and you're going to present throughout. And again, I did not choose to go with all of that standard. It was a lot, I think, for a fourth grader to take in at one time. So I instead broke it off into chunks, and I'm covering to the volcanic connection, the patterning there, and also covering the mountains. So we'll talk about those patterns. Before you even get your students to the actual GeoInquiry with the website, have them answer the first two questions. Can you name any mountain ranges? If so, name them below. Most of our students should be able to name the Smokies. Beyond that, hopefully they know the Rockies, but I almost guarantee most of them do not know the Andes Mountains or the Alps or the Himalayas. Maybe they know those. So it's kind of good to gather some information and to get their brain in gear for this lesson. Question 2, how many mountain ranges do you think exist in the world? And this is a great question because I've seen kids think one way or the other. Like they think there's just tons of mountain ranges, and then others are like there's 3. So you're going to get a wide variety. This is important for our students to understand that we're not looking for a right or wrong answer on these 2 questions. We're simply beginning to think about mountain ranges and volcanoes. And today we're going to dive in utilizing GIS to understand and explore these. So to start exploring, they're going to need to type in that address. So if you will go ahead and type in that address, you can explore this along with me, or you can simply watch the video as I explore it. I do have a little bit of a split screen going so that you can see the handout and then also look at the map. So I'll be sliding this over so we get a bigger view of the map when needed. So you're going to have your students begin looking at the map, just examining it. We want them to notice the purple areas. These are the various mountain ranges around the world. So if we're our students and we're taking a look at this, the first thing they're going to probably start saying is, whoa, there's way more mountain ranges than I thought there were, right? They're going to start noticing, yeah, maybe I was a little bit wrong about how many mountain ranges there are. They're also going to notice probably something kind of strange, because when we look at this, they're going to say, what is this giant thing down here? And it's just the way that the map is lined up that makes it look a little strange. If they want to, they can zoom in a little bit and see it differently. But these purple areas are mountain ranges that are located around the world. And maybe they can even find, if you ask them, okay, where are the Appalachian Mountains? And they can point this out. Where are the Rockies? Where are the Andes, if they know them? Different mountain ranges so that they can begin to form an understanding of the map, if possible. Like I said, some of them will have no idea, and that's okay too. All right, so then we've done that. We're going to answer this. Are there more or less mountain ranges than you thought? So looking at the number that we listed up here, comparing that to the number we have on here, it should be pretty obvious, yes or no, but if they need to count, give them time to do some counting. Now we've got a screenshot, which I said is very important when we're making handouts for our students. It's way easier to understand than me just saying, okay, now we're going to click on this. Okay, now looking at your screen, you will now need to click on content to be able to dive into the information contained in this map. So we're going to click on the button that it shows. Now, my map is scrunched, so it doesn't have the word next to it, but if I stretch it back out, we're going to see where it says content. So you're going to select content, and we're going to see all of the different layers pop up. So far, the only layer that's showing on this map are the world mountain ranges. And then, of course, we have our terrain with our labels. That's our base map. So we can see all these purple things are turned on, okay? Let's see what it asks us to do now. Using the options to answer the following questions by clicking and unclicking the boxes next to each layer. So utilizing these layers, we're going to answer some questions. Using the tectonic boundaries layer, where do most mountains occur? So I'm going to turn that layer on, and now I'm going to take a look at my mountains. So looking at where these plate lines occur, and where my mountain ranges, is there a relationship between them? It's pretty much what we're asking the students to find. It's pretty evident that most mountain ranges lie on a tectonic plate boundary. We know as teachers there's a reason for that. The students may or may not have an understanding of that, and that's okay. That's what this is about, is teaching them that. So Where do most mountains occur? And if they look at that map and think about the information contained in it, I don't know how they would come to any other idea other than most of them fall on a tectonic plate line, a boundary. Why do you think that is the case? Now, this is where we get into, are they right or are they wrong? And this can be a point where you pause the lesson after they finish number 2 if you want to and talk to them about how those mountains form, or you can let the lesson play out, and at the end you can come in and say, hey, guess what? We've got this action. But for me, I would let the lesson play out and see if they gather that on their own, because it is STEM. It is more about what the student is doing than what you're doing. So sometimes it's good to take it off your plate. So using the plate motion layer, we can look and see, we've got plate motion layer. Describe how the plates are pushing in South America and the impact this has had. So if I turn this on and I look at South America, which if your students don't know their continents, this might be a little bit tricky. They can zoom in if they'd like. And you can kind of see that we've got this tectonic plate moving towards the east, and we've got this tectonic plate moving towards the west. So we're kind of having a collision here. So what's the impact those two plates colliding might have? And this is where it might actually help them answer number 2. They might go back and say, oh, if they're hitting against each other, what's going to happen? And that's where we're going to get that upthrusting, that mountain happening. So let's keep going. Okay, going with our GeoInquiry, it says now click the legend under the tectonic boundaries layer. So I'm here at tectonic boundaries, just like in the picture. And I go over here and I see this drop down. So it says show legend. So I'm going to click. Oh, this puts a whole new level on this, doesn't it? So now we're going to look, and using the key right here that we just pulled up, we're going to explain how many mountain chains fall on each type of boundary. Now this question is almost directly from the GeoInquiry that they provided us with. I didn't have to make many changes to this GeoInquiry to make it fit for our kiddos. I had to take out a lot of questions, but this question was almost directly from them. I did put a screenshot of the legend as it falls, just because sometimes it's easier to refer to that and understand there's a link between this word and this color for our students. So anytime you can include a screenshot to clarify, the better. It can get a little bit cumbersome. Don't let it overwhelm you, but try to do your best on those. So once we do that, we're going to take a look. We're going to zoom out and let our kiddos start counting mountain ranges on the various colors. Some of the areas are going to get kind of tricky because when we look over here in California, we've got some colors overlapping and overlaying. These numbers do not have to be exactly correct. We want them to see a general trend. So just by looking at the map and by our purple mountain chains, we can kind of see most of them are going to fall along one of these blues, which is a convergent boundary, which means the two plates are hitting against each other and causing that upthrusting to happen. And if you wanted to talk about your ocean ridges, you could do that really easily with these same tectonic plate movements. Super easy to change over. All right, so then we want the students to answer what type of boundary produces the most mountains and why. And we talked about that a minute ago. They're going to see that convergent boundary. That's when they're going to start thinking about, okay, what do I know about convergent? What do I know about divergent? What do I know about transformative? And they're going to start thinking about, yep, if these two plates are pushing against each other, we get an upthrusting of the earth because they meet and push against each other and come up. No other direction to go. All right, so now the next step is we're going to ask our students to now turn off the World Mountain Ranges layer by clicking the checkbox next to it. So I've given them very step-by-step directions. So they're going to click that box. Now the mountain ranges are gone. That's because we're going to dive in to the volcanoes. So from here, we're going to actually turn on our volcanoes global layer by clicking the checkbox next to it. Okay? So now that we've clicked that checkbox, we're now going to look at our next set of questions. And it's a very interesting map. Let's take a look at the map first, actually. If you've never explored this, these are actually all the volcanoes around the world. If I kind of zoom in, you can see they're everywhere, right? We think of just the main ones, but when we talk about volcanoes, not all of them are active. This is a map of all the volcanoes. So we can kind of see what type of volcano it is if we want to click on it. We can talk about its status. We can talk about its specific name, its elevation if you wanted to, its latitude and its longitude. And you can even zoom in if you wanted to, let the kids take a look at the terrain around it. But let's stick to our GeoInquiry for now and kind of see where we're going with this. So where do most volcanoes form around the world? And it's going to be a pretty similar answer to the mountains, right? We see them form around these tectonic plate boundaries. And there's a good reason for that. We want our students to understand that pattern. That is what that standard is about, is the pattern of these mountains and volcanoes. That's what I'm talking about with a GeoInquiry. If it's carefully developed, carefully planned, it is going to lead those students directly to that standard and let them do it through their own exploration. So our question number 2 is, what types of plate boundaries produce the most volcanoes? So this is for them to look around at and kind of see, I've got a red line here. I've got my divergent boundary here. The few volcanoes, but not many. But if I look at my convergent boundaries, it's a lot of volcanoes popping up. So we're going to kind of let the students discern that by looking at their map, looking all the way around the world and kind of seeing what do we see. How does this compare with mountains? So now we're asking them to look back at, what did we figure out about the mountains? What do we now know about the mountains and the volcanoes? Is their pattern the same? Is it similar, or is it completely different? Because when we get asked questions in science, we know they're not always black and white. So we want our students to see that as well. All right, so let's look at the next part. This is kind of the closeout. This is where we're going to wrap it up and get our kids to see it and actually pretty much answer those standards. So what pattern do you see between mountains and volcanoes? They're going to make it explicitly aware to you what they're thinking. Do they see that relationship or do they not? And you right away know, do I've got the standard covered or do I not? Number 2, how can knowing this pattern impact us today? And this comes into that real world problem solving and critical thinking. What does this pattern mean to our current life? How does it impact society today? And so students might say, okay, well, it might change how we view housing practices. It might change where we know we need to plan for emergency situations like volcanic eruptions or earthquakes more. So those are all great ways they can utilize the data from this map to make an impact on society today. And number 3, the last one, and I usually ask this question whenever I do a GIS lesson. I close it out with a question about GIS specifically. How can GIS impact our knowledge of science? So how does understanding mountains and volcanoes through GIS change our knowledge of science? And for a student to understand that, that's a really deep question we're asking them to dive into. But believe it or not, they will give you some beautiful answers to that. And they'll start to see the connection that GIS has for them, along with how it can help them grow in their knowledge of situations and really in their knowledge of understanding data. All right, to close out today's session, this is our exit ticket. To showcase what you've learned in this session, you are going to create your own simple GeoInquiry. So it doesn't have to be as complex as the one was that I've provided for you. You're starting, baby steps. Select a base GeoInquiry from the Esri website. Be sure you can make it work for your selected standard. Then I want you to create a student handout using Google Docs and submit the link in the exit ticket Google form that's located to the left of this screen. When you select, you don't have to do a bunch of standards in one. I chose just one standard to really focus in on and use GIS to tie in, but whatever you feel like is going to be your best, then do that. This is just to get you in there, get your feet wet, get you to start thinking about how can this be used in my classroom. Thank you guys for joining me for this session today. If you have any questions, make sure you follow up in our live session that we're having. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions, make sure you post them to our discussion board, our parking lot. And you can always reach out to me. My contact information is located to the left of this viewing screen. And I look forward to seeing you all in our live sessions. Thank you, guys.